All right, today I'm going to give a brief introduction to Oil Pastel. So if it is part of your assignment that you need to take notes, make sure that you pause the video right now. Go get your sketchbook or a paper to take notes and a pen or pencil. The most important things to take notes about are going to be definitions, techniques, and then artists who use oil pastels. So oil pastels is one of my favorite media. I might say that about every media, but it is great for doing work in color and to create a complete painting with or a sketch. So here's some definitions that you need to know. Some of these we may have already covered. Either way, it is good to take notes and copy down the definitions so that we all have the same working set of vocabulary. So the first definition that we're going to be using is transition. It is a gradual fading of one color to another or from one value to another. So a transition can be from red to orange, but it could be from red to white or red to black. So black, white, and gray are all values, and red is a color. So if it fades to white, then it is fading to another value. If it fades to orange, it is fading to another color. Flat. When I talk about flat in the context of coloring or shading, it is an even area that does not show value or color change. So it's one solid area. If I look at a Post-it note, it has a flat value on it. It's just all that same color green. However, sometimes when I look at things and they have curved surfaces, then I start to see transitions. That's no longer flat. So it's referring to not really a shape, but the surface quality of the color or value. Opaque. So when I talk about watercolor, I talk about watercolor being transparent. Well, for oil pastel, we want the color to be built up transparently, but to end up opaque. So opaque means it's not being able to be seen through. There are kind of different levels of opacity. Sometimes we can say something's transparent, something's translucent, or it's opaque. So along that scale of completely see-through to completely solid. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is mixed color. So when we mix colors, and we've done this with colored pencil before, you're alternating two different oil pastels to create a new mixed color. So if we were talking about painting, you would mix a color on a palette. You would take either water or two different colors and you would mix them together. Well, in oil pastel, we do that by alternating layers of different oil pastels. So if you don't have those all copied down, go ahead and pause the video and finish that. All right, what we're going to talk about next is what oil pastels are made out of. So oil pastels are made out of oil, shocking, wax, and pigment. So pigment is what gives the oil pastel the color. So a red oil pastel stick has red pigment in it. There's many different brands of oil pastels. You can get a pretty reasonably priced set of oil pastels that's a good quality. But the best of the best it's a Sennelier oil pastel. A set of 12 will cost you $32. Sakura Crepa Expressionist, that is this green box over here on the right. This set of 12 costs $6.50. And then Pentel makes a pretty decent set for $2. But what happens is that the lower the quality, the more wax or filler that is in that set. And what that means is that you're not going to get as vibrant of colors and it's not going to mix as easily. There are a lot of other brands. There's also something called water-soluble oil pastels. This portfolio set right here is water-soluble. So that means you can color an area and then you can take a wet paintbrush and you can smooth it out that way. Neocolor or Cran d'Arche makes a water-soluble set of oil pastels also. Very closely related to wax crayons. So crayons, or artists can use wax crayons, which is obviously has more wax in it than the oil. So the origin of oil pastels, in 1949, Sennelier produced the first oil pastels intended for professionals and experienced artists. So actually, this is kind of a little bit of an interesting part of art history, is that Pablo Picasso actually asked Sennelier to make something, this oil pastel stick, that he could really quickly complete color sketches. So he's using it for sketches before he completes larger works in oil paints. So that is actually relatively new as far as the art world goes. There's not a lot of new mediums out there. Oil pastel is one of them, which is probably why we don't see as much oil pastel work as finished pieces in art museums. It is known as a drawing medium, but a finished oil pastel is called a painting. So what do you want to use or to color on when you use oil pastel? You want to use a thicker paper, and any paper with tooth. So tooth kind of describes the texture of a paper, but papers that are a little rougher kind of will grab onto the oil pastel a little bit better. So this illustration shows you kind of a difference of texture. Smooth papers are really good for pen and marker. As you get more rough, you start to use media like pencils, mechanical pencils, graphite pencils. Oil pastel is here in the rougher side. The roughest papers are the ones with the most tooth that can grab. You would want to use for charcoal or pastels. So we're going to be using our sketchbook paper. I also like a gray paper called a bogus paper. It's a lot like a manila paper. This is good for oil pastel work also. So just as I mentioned, a finished oil pastel piece is called a painting, and it should appear opaque. So if you're in the classroom with me, I will be passing out examples of finished student artwork so you can see how much the oil pastel builds up after many layers and becomes very thick. The trick with oil pastel is that you want to use many light layers, and if you use light layers, it does build up to be thick. You don't want to press just really hard. If you press really hard with oil pastel, then what actually happens is it thins the surface of the oil pastel. So oil pastel does not have to be one certain style. There are many styles that you can use, and one is called textural. So this piece over on the left with the bird is more textural, and you can see the mark made by the artist of the oil with the oil pastel. You can also have very smooth blending. Now, just because it's smooth doesn't mean somebody has smoothed it out with their finger, that they have really carefully applied the oil pastel in many layers, and just the final layer, they are using their oil pastel to smooth it out. You've made maybe other oil pastel works where you've used tools to blend, but we are going to kind of practice some more advanced application with the oil pastel, in that we're not using any blending tools or blending media. We are just using the oil pastel. So textural also means that you can see purposeful art making, mark making. So in these pieces, you can see some finer lines and areas of color that are applied very purposefully. It changes with the direction that the artist is using the media with. So here's some artwork where it is applied smooth and opaque. We have more artwork where it's applied very smooth. This is a student artwork from a couple years ago. This I want to see to see how like this layering works with oil pastel. You use thin, light layers. That means you're using a light touch to build up solid, opaque covering. So on these areas out here, these are the first layers. So it is thin. It is transparent still. It is very rough looking. But as you build up more, and you can see this in the area of the hands, it will become more opaque. If when you're coloring you get a lot of crumbs, you are actually pressing too hard and you kind of want to back off on your pressure. So you want to avoid crumbs, and oil pastels really shouldn't break. If you are having a hard time and your oil pastel breaks, it's because you're pressing too hard. So again, back off your pressure. I've already kind of addressed this, but I don't want you rubbing your oil pastel with fingers or a blending tool or paper towel. We are going to use the oil pastel stick to do the blending. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I just kind of want you to think why I might be asking you to do this. Think about how you've used oil pastels in the past or how you've used other media. And think about how you can grow. So you may have had experience before, but I'm introducing some new techniques to you and trying to help you to grow just a little bit more in your art making skills. So oil pastels never dry, which means there are very few hopeless situations. So I have oil pastel pieces that I've been working on for years, and I just go right back to using and adding new layers on the artwork. So it's kind of one of the nice things about oil pastel, especially when you're trying to blend areas. Unlike paintings where your oil or your painting will dry quickly as you're working, oil pastels don't, so you can take breaks. You can stop at the end of a class period and pick up right where you left off the next period. So edges can be tricky with oil pastel. A lot of students find it helpful on their first oil pastels to use an outline. So if you choose to do an outline in your artwork because that fits your style and the way that you're learning how to use your oil pastel, I recommend using a color pencil. And you can do this at the beginning, but really it's at the end that you add that detail work with the oil pastel, or sorry, with the color pencil. Here's some more student artwork. These outlines were done with different color pencils. So your outlines don't have to be just in a black color pencil. So we are going to talk about transitioning, but as you work with your oil pastels, it is usually better to start with your lighter colors first and then work to your dark. So I almost never use black in a finished artwork, but if I do, I save it to the very last. There's a lot of reasons for that, but mainly it's about craftsmanship and the way that colors blend in with each other. So I want you to keep that in mind as you're working. Work from your lighter colors and then move to your darker colors. Nice thing about things, artworks that are in color, is that we can start to use more expressive color. So that means that we don't have to paint a tree green just because that's the way it is in real life. You can actually paint or color whatever color you would like for an emotional response or an expressive response. So these pieces show some more expressive use of color. Again, the style that you want to use with oil pastel varies. This is more surreal. Sometimes it's more realistic, but that's up to you. Again, use of expressive color in this piece with oil pastel and a still life. Textural work. While this piece is more rendered more realistically as far as form, we get that idea of volume. The color is a little bit more intense, and the textural quality is also more purposeful to create an artistic effect. Again, more textural work, more smooth work. This is a student artwork. So there is a wide range of styles and different ways to use oil pastel. So I hope that you learn a little bit more about how to use this medium in this next unit, and that you can find a way to fit it into the artwork that you want to create. that's it.